Today, we're benchmarking the brand new game from the Borderlands franchise called Tiny Tina's Wonderland. I started doing this video series with the launch of Elden Ring, and the majority of you really seem to enjoy it, so I figured why not keep it going. Now, if you like this type of content, just be sure to hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out, and it will let me know that you want me to keep making this type of content. And by the way, a pro tip, if you don't like this type of content, all you have to do is hit that dislike button 2 times, and that will really let me know you don't like it. So Tiny Tina's Wonderland is a spin-off series from the Borderlands franchise, so it will more or less look and feel and play exactly like a typical Borderlands game. If you're a Borderlands fan, you're probably gonna like it, and if you're not a Borderlands fan, well, then you're probably not gonna like it. But we're not here to talk about the game from a reviewer's perspective. We're actually here to talk about the technical aspects of the game and how well it performs on a PC. Now today we're benchmarking the game using an RTX 3070, so that means we're gonna go through all the settings and figure out how well we can actually run the game. Now, games definitely seem to be getting a little bit more demanding, but a RTX 3070 is well above the minimum requirements for this game, so I think we're gonna be totally fine. Now, for my next video, I definitely plan on breaking out my newly acquired RTX 3080 and doing all the same tests, and it's gonna be interesting to see how well this game runs on a 3070 versus how well it runs on a 3080. But okay, if you wanna see the 3080 video, just be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss it. I'll have it linked in the pinned comment below this video whenever it's live. And without any further ado, let's fire up the game and see how well we can run Tiny Tina's Wonderland using an RTX 3070. Okay, so we're over on Tiny Tina's Wonderland, and I've already gone through the character creation stuff and the opening cinematics and all that stuff. So we are in the opening area and we are ready to play. Now, before we do all that, I want to point out a couple of things to you. So this game actually has a built-in benchmark. So technically, you don't even need to do what I'm doing here. You don't have to play the game and monitor the frame rate. You can simply pick the settings you want, hit start benchmark, and at the end of it, it will tell you how well your PC can run the game at those particular settings. Now, I would do that for you, but I mean, let's be honest, that's a pretty boring video, right? So we're gonna start off by using a native 4K. Now, really quickly before we do that, this reminds me, DirectX 11. You wanna make sure you're using DirectX 11. DirectX 12 is broken. So we're gonna do DirectX 11, we're gonna do native 4K, and of course, we're gonna start off on the bad preset. Okay, so getting into the game, you can clearly see we're on the bad preset at native 4K, and we're struggling a little bit over here. Some areas we're in the 40s, and in other areas we dip down to the 30s. And obviously this is definitely less than desirable. It is definitely playable. So if you want the highest graphics possible at the highest resolution possible, then you can definitely still have a playable experience. For me personally, I don't really want to see anything below 60. So what I want to do is I want to test the settings and see what we can tweak in order to get this up to 60 frames per second. Now, the easiest way to do this, obviously, is by simply changing the bad preset over to Ultra. Ultra is lower than bad, so ideally the frame rate should increase. Now we have 51 frames per second, and obviously that is higher than the 38, the 39 frames that we were seeing a while ago. Now we're still below the 60 FPS marker, but clearly we are on the right track here. What happens if we take the ultra setting and we drop it down to high? Okay, so now we're on the high preset at native 4K and we're still in the 50s. And so far, I'm not really seeing too much of a performance improvement at all. Honestly, it doesn't really seem like there's too much of a performance difference between using the high preset and the ultra preset. So it really seems like you can play on ultra if that's what you want to do. And if we switch back over and if we lower the resolution down to 1440p, what can we expect to see? Okay, so now we're at 1440p using the bad preset, and we are now at 80 frames per second. Obviously, as we walk around, that will dip a little bit and increase a little bit. But the fact that we went from 4K all the way down to 1440p and we saw this big of a jump, that really screams to me that this is yet again another game just like Elden Ring, where the main benefit that you're going to see from a performance standpoint is by changing the resolution as opposed to changing the in-game settings like any of the graphics or textures or anything like that. We're at 1440p on Ultra, and right here in this area where we saw 60s before, we're now seeing 70s and 80s right here in this same area around the chest. As I I continue to walk up the hill, what happens? Well, we're getting closer to the 90s, and now we're dipping back down. If I turn around and walk back down the hill, it definitely seems like we drop back down to the 60s. Okay, so we're down to 1440p and the high preset, and as you can see, we're actually breaking 90 FPS. We got 91, we got 92. It went all the way up to like 93 there for a second, 94, 95, 96. So depending on what part of the game you're in, yeah, we just broke over 100 FPS. So yeah, it completely depends on what part of the game you're in, which will determine your frame rate. Obviously, by dropping from 4K all the way down to 1440p, that radically improved our frame rate. And then of course, now we're on 1440p high, and we're actually able to cross over the 100 FPS marker. Okay, so we're now at 1080p on the bad preset. And right here in this area, we're hitting around 94 to 95 FPS. Now, previously at 1440p, which was a higher resolution, on the high preset, which is a lower quality preset, we temporarily were able to hit 115 frames per second right here on this bridge. So what I find very interesting here is that even though we're actually at a lower resolution, the fact that we're at a higher preset is actually holding us back here. Okay, so now we're on 1080p Ultra, and I'm walking back over to the bridge, and so far it's not too much of an improvement. So right now, what this is telling me is that at 1080p, there is virtually no difference between using the Ultra preset and the bad preset in terms of a frame rate perspective. But what happens if we lower it one more time down to the high preset? Oh, there we go. There we go. High preset, 1080p. We're all over the place. I temporarily saw 144 frames per second. I saw 120, 156, 57, 58. So this game's frame rate counter is honestly all over the place depending on like where you're looking, because look right here in this angle right here, 1080p high preset, 160 plus FPS. But if I turn around and walk over here, 140, 130. If I turn around and walk over here, 106, 98, 101. So it completely depends on what you're looking at, which I find very interesting. Okay, we're now playing at 720p on the high preset. And this is definitely taking me back to the Xbox 360 days, because wow, it's definitely a lot more blurry than it was before, I will tell you that. Okay, so we're looking at our magical spot, and it looks like the highest frame rate I've seen so far is 168 frames per second, which honestly seems a little bit odd. Sometimes MSI Afterburner will not track properly. Like for example, if a game has an internal frame rate cap of like 120, it will still sometimes show 121 or 122. So there is some room for error. I did just see it hit 170 frames per second. So maybe the internal cap is 170. I don't know. I need to look it up. Okay, so I looked it up, and it turns out that Tiny Tina's Wonderland actually has a frame rate limit of 300 frames per second. So I don't know what we were seeing there. I don't know why we couldn't really get above 170 frames even at 720p. You can test it and let me know in the comments below if you were able to get it any higher using your hardware. Now, what I will say is that I did lose some performance because I was using OBS to record all of that while I was actually benchmarking it. So maybe without OBS, we could get up a little bit higher, but it's not going to be that much higher. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If you're new here, get subscribed because I would love to have you. Don't miss the 3080 video I have coming up very soon because it's coming up next. All right, well, until next time, E-Rock out.